In our second video of Unit 10, we're going to talk about how to add and subtract rational functions. So in our first video, I talked about how to multiply and divide. Now we're going to add and subtract. Okay, so back in middle school, when you were learning how to add and subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. So in order for us to add these rational functions, the denominator must be the same on both fractions. So if you look at the denominator of the first fraction, we have x plus 3. If you look at the denominator of the second fraction, we also have x plus 3, here and here. So we already have a common denominator. So if you have a common denominator, we add the numerator, so 3x plus 6x is 9x. The plus 2 just follows because there's nothing else. So we combine like terms in the numerator and leave the denominator alone. So when we're adding and subtracting, first there has to be a common denominator. If there is a common denominator, we combine like terms in the numerator and leave the denominator alone. Okay, so in this example, we don't have a common denominator. I have an x plus 1 and an x plus 2, and those are not the same thing. The thing with common denominator is these are factors. They're protected. Even though they're not in parentheses, we need to think of them as parentheses. So think of them as factors. So my first fraction, I have 5 over x plus 1. Second fraction, I got x minus 5 over x plus 2. So, okay, we're here. I need to have a common denominator, and the x plus 1 and x plus 2 are protected. So because I need the same thing in the denominator of both fractions, I'm going to have to put the factor that's missing into the first fraction. So in the denominator, my common denominator is both factors. So my common denominator here is going to be x plus 1 and x plus 2. In the original problem, I had 5 over x plus 1. So if I'm adding an x plus 2 to the denominator, I also have to add an x plus 2 to the numerator. In the second fraction, I need x plus 2 and x plus 1 both in the denominator. So I have to add an x plus 1 in the numerator as well. So now, if you look, I do have, it doesn't matter that they're written backwards, it's the same thing. I do have a common denominator. And once we have a common denominator, we just need to combine like terms in the numerator. But the key to adding and subtracting happens right here that I'll highlight in blue. There and there. The factor that's missing from each fraction, you need to put it in the numerator and the denominator. So now I need to distribute. So I've got 5x plus 10 over x plus 1, x plus 2. You don't have to distribute the denominator. Minus x squared minus 4x minus 5. And if you distribute x minus 5, x plus 1, you get x squared minus 4x minus 5. If you don't trust me or think I made a mistake, you can do it yourself and just let me know. So now we need to combine like terms in the numerator. So we have no x squared in the first fraction minus x squared. So that's negative x squared. Then I have 5x minus 4x, which is 9x. And then I have 10 minus 5, which is 15. And that's my answer. So if you don't already have a common denominator, you need to give each fraction the factor from the denominator that it's missing. So the first fraction, I needed x plus 1, x plus 2. But in the original problem, I only had an x plus 1 in the denominator, so I had to give it the extra x plus 2 that it needed. The second fraction, I needed x plus 2 and x plus 1 in the denominator, but in the original question, it only had x plus 2. So I had to give it or add to it the x plus 1 that it was missing. And then we're just distributing and combining like terms from there. All right, so example 3 is kind of worst case scenario for most of you because we have to factor. So in this third example, the first thing I'm going to do is factor x squared plus 7x plus 6. So if we factor that, we get x plus 6, x plus 1, over x plus 1. And remember, even though that's not in parentheses, we're going to put it in parentheses. So now, for me to actually add or subtract these, I have to have a common denominator. So if I look at the first fraction has x plus 1 and x plus 6. It has both of them. The second fraction only has x plus 1. So the second fraction is missing, the denominator is missing the factor of x plus 6. So since it is missing the factor x plus 6, I need to add the factor x plus 6 to the numerator and the denominator in order for the denominator to be the same. So if I look here now, this and this are now the same. So now I do have my common denominator. So now I need to writing in highlighter. I need to distribute in my second fraction. And now we combine like terms. So I have no x squared in the first fraction minus x squared in the second fraction. Then x minus 6x is minus 5x. And then 4 minus nothing is 4 over x plus 6, x plus 1. So adding and subtracting rationals, we have to have a common denominator. If you don't already have one, you have to make one. So like in this last example, the first fraction, after I factored it, had a denominator of x plus 6 and x plus 1. The second fraction only had x plus 1 in the denominator. So it was missing the x plus 6. So since the second fraction was missing the factor of x plus 6 in the denominator, I had to put x plus 6 in the numerator and denominator. That way I would have the common denominator I needed.